Welcome to this book launch event, the book launch for the book Socioecological Transformations, which is the first part of the launch events. There will be another launch. We will talk about that. I'm going to be acting as the moderator of today's session, together with Domna Chemi. With her support, I'll be moderating. I'm Esin Düzel. I'm a sociocultural anthropologist based at the Natural Resources Institute, Finland, Luke, in Helsinki. And I would like to remind everyone who has been here and who is joining that today we are recording this session, and then this recording will be uploaded on the project sites, out of which this book has emerged, so that it will be available for wider audiences. And as we said, and we can maybe start the presentation, Domna, if you have it already. So this is the first of two launches, and today we are going to be focusing on ontological and relational transformations, as well as, so we go to the first slide and you have a quick peek into the slides. So today's book launch is on ontological and relational transformations, as well as care and education as transformative practices. So in order to find out about the second book launch, you can go to the website justglobeproject.com, and it's going to be on December 9th. So can we go to the next slide, please, Domna? The next slide? Yeah. So here is the layout, very brief layout. Yeah, the very brief layout of today. We're going to have an hour and a half, but it's structured so that we will be pacing quite fast. We will have 5 parts. In the first part, which is going to be 7 to 10 minutes, every contributor for the first part of the book is composed of 2 parts, and today's presenters are contributors to the first part. They will be giving you the key ideas from their chapters, which we call seeds, something that you can take away with you. We will have an opening circle composed of these seeds of 7 contributors, and then we will have 3 clusters or 3 short panels, if you wish. And the first panel will talk about inner worlds, relational and non-dual ontologies. The second cluster, the second short panel, will look into land, ancestral knowledge, wisdom, and more than human. And the third panel will look into care, feminism, education, resistance. We know these are very broad, very comprehensive titles, but our contributors have made sure that they present the gist of their chapters so that we can initiate some conversations and then leave you with a lot of food for thought. So every short panel is composed of presenters' short presentations and some time devoted to collective reflection among the panel presenters. And today's event ends with a dedicated time to collective reflection, where we welcome exchanges with the audiences. However, I would like to remind you that you can please turn off your mics. First of all, we are having some noises. Disable mic, yeah. And I would like to remind you that you can type your questions throughout the presentations on the chat. We will make sure that we go through them and then we can highlight them during the discussions at the end of the panels, but you will have definitely dedicated time to pose your questions at the end of the event. So without further ado, I would like to start the first opening circle, the seeds. We can go to the next slide. So our presenters will present you the seed of their chapter in 1 minute, just one idea, a story, an image that they want us, they want to live with us from this event and maybe spark our interests and our curiosity to their work. So let's start with Sabah.
Thank you, Estin. So I have 2 seeds for the 2 chapters. My first seed is that our inner and outer worlds are 2 threads of the same fabric. So we are not only individuals or only collectives, not only inner beings or outer actors. We are both always and simultaneously, and of course, much more than only those 2 things. So every transformation is multidimensional, having different sides. What changed within us, our worldviews, fears, hopes, senses, and what changed around us. So our institutions, cultures, systems, structures, and so on are woven together. We live in participatory universe. Our small acts of participations and meaning making ripple outward, shaping the world and reality, which of course in turn also shapes us back. And we are not in the world, we are out of it. I'm sure someone may have said this before. It's based on participatory universe and also the other thinkers. But the task is not to choose between the personal or the political, unity or resistance, inner work or collective struggles, but to hold them together as mutually reinforcing sides of transformations. And then please next seed with the next slide. The second seed, inner change is radical. It's like changing the soil rather than trimming the leaves. When the soil changes, the whole ecology of our actions changes with it. So, of course, under immediate threats, violence, displacement, murder, we act as we must, we resist to survive. But most of us, most of the time, are not in such immediate threats. And from that relative safety, we have different responsibility to change ourselves in a way that changes the world, to hopefully reduce or make sure that fewer and fewer are exposed to immediate threats of violence. So inner transformations does not replace political struggle. It can sustain it. I should have put there that can. It can make transformation not something we should or are expected to do out of pressure, out of expectations, but something that is an expression of who we are or who we are becoming, which is why it's important what our inner state is like for transformations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabaheta, and thanks for keeping the time. Okay, we move to Aslıhan, Oğuz, and Ilona Steyler. I think Ilona is going to present the seeds. Go ahead, Ilona.
Yes, thank you. So in our chapter, we say or we claim that also in socio-ecological transformative movements, even though they have the best of intentions and they do a lot of good work, these acts and intentions of care are also always entangled with violence. So in the chapter, we address the question, since we cannot change that fact, how can we recognize and work with those what we call deficits of care? And the idea of the chapter was to draw on our experiences as 5 researchers and academics coming from different national and cultural backgrounds and being at different career stages, but we had all experienced deficits of care, both in our scholarly work, in the objects that we study, but also personally. So we were drawing on those experiences, and we wrote a chapter that dealt with dynamics of violence and power and care along 4 examples. And one of them was our work in academia. Another example was the World Social Forum, then health promoting food movements, and finally local crop sharing and food sovereignty initiatives. And you will hear about the last example a bit later from Aslihan.
Thank you, Ilona. So rich. So we move to, can we see the next slide to understand? Yes, we move to Paula Minoa and Tamara Taher's seats, which Sabah will present, I guess. Yes, the speakers will join us later today for the panel. So we will have, Sabah, are you presenting or should I? You're muted?
I cannot open the slide. Can you? Oh, it has closed. Can you please read it? I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah, of course. So Paula and Tamara's chapter and seed is about resistance existence within and against education in colonized lands. They are saying resisting colonial displacement and annihilation involves reconnecting to the land. Higher education is a contested space where tensions between coloniality and anti-colonial resistance arise. Struggles for justice, liberation, and onto-epistemic recognition reclaim land-based and community learning. Their research concerns Ecuador and Palestine, so they look at different experiences of colonial violence against land and the very existence of indigenous and colonized peoples. We can move to the next. No, actually we have Maria Fernanda Guevara. Let's hear your seed, Maria Fernanda.
Yeah, thank you. So my chapter is about indigenous spiritualities and how they could be helpful in moving to what has been called an ancestral future. And I look at how rituals, specifically the Yawanawa rituals, and practices could help us in achieving what was called the ecological self. And the main seed of my chapter is that our ecological crisis may be actually seen as a spiritual crisis. And I also discuss how this indigenous spiritual awakening could be seen both as a response to dominant anthropocentric practices and also a consequence of such practices. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for keeping to the time. And let's hear from Irmelin Gram Hansen.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so my chapter is focusing on exploring relationality as a mode of understanding and a mode of being, and I draw and point to similarities between indigenous ways of being relational and post-humanist scholarship on relationality, to see the convergence and to try to point to some central principles, which are that of responsibility and potentiality. And for my seed, I would like to share a quote by TOS scholar Gregory Cayette, which in many ways summarizes what it is I'm trying to communicate in many, many more words in this chapter. He writes, "We cannot help but participate with the world. Whether we acknowledge and are creatively open to perceptions that will result, or remain oblivious to its influence and creative possibilities toward deeper understanding, is our decision." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irmelin. That's a beautiful quote. And then last but not least, Maria Ernström Fuentes. Let's hear your seed, please.
Yes, thank you. So my chapter is about regenerative farmers and how they change through ontological transformation, the way that they view, not just view and make sense of the world, but how their whole world changes as they move into regenerative farming. And my chapter draws on actually a little bit of indigenous scholarship and also ontological politics, but trying to make sense of this transformation as not a mindset transformation, but actually something that is relationally constituted through the practices. And my seed consists of two quotes. First from Robin Wall Kimmerer, I want to read up, and then one quote from one of the farmers. So a quote from Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. In some native languages, the terms for plants translates to those who take care of us. Action on behalf of life transforms, because the relationship between the self and the world is reciprocal. It is not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us. And then a powerful quote from one of the farmers who I have engaged with in my conversations. We have come to realize that the cows are not just themselves. They are part of the grass is part of the soil, of the microlife that exists. All these entities belong together and we belong with them. This interconnection is always there. Getting eyes to see this has made the cows even more dear to me, because suddenly they are not just here for me, for my own high pleasure or for my food or anything like that. They make nature, our landscape, come alive. So I think that these two quotes complement each other and show a little bit what I will be talking about.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for bringing Kemer and your interviewer together here, Maria. Yes, thanks to you all for these 7 beautifully crafted, very rich, inspiring seeds. We will hear, luckily, fortunately, we will hear more about them today throughout our session. So let's move into the first small panel and cluster, which is concerned with inner worlds, relational and non-dual ontologies. And here our panel, it consists of Sabaheta Ramcilovic-Suominen and Irmelin Gram-Hansen. We will start with Sabaheta. Sabaheta is an associate research professor and Research Council of Finland fellow at the Natural Resources Institute, Finland. Luke. Yes, Sabaheta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I realize I shared with you the old bios, but it doesn't matter. I'm not an associate research professor. Sorry,
you are a full professor now, exactly.
But also, I am not the Finnish fellow anymore. It ended in August. Nonetheless, thanks again, and welcome to everyone who is still joining. It's really nice to see you all here. Okay, so I'll move to the book that we are presenting today. So Socioecological Transformations. It was published this summer. It's accessible as open access. And I'm going to start with the book's aims and positioning it in the literature. So next slide, please. So book's aims and yeah, literature, how it fits within the literature of transformations. So what is this book about and why another one on transformations in 2025, 2026? There is plenty of research and literature out there already. And if we were to imagine this literature on a spectrum, I would put the sustainability transitions on the one side, which are, so this body of research is emphasizing the policy and institutional technoscientific innovation as most potent responses to the polycrisis. And another important feature is that there is very little or no attention to the colonial and neo-colonial racial capitalist structures and systems of violence. Then on the other side or extreme, we could position the radical socioecological transformations, which are emphasizing precisely these structural and systemic causes. So the racial capitalist, colonial, neo-colonial systems. Now, most of my own research and contributions until now has been within this strand of literature. So I find it important. It goes for just post-growth, the anti-colonial, the anti-capitalist transformations. But what it largely omits, I argue in the book, we argue, is those ontological underpinnings of the structural violence that it talks about. So in short, there is a tendency in the literature to downplay the roles of our quote-unquote inner worlds. So worldviews, simply, ways we know the world, ways we relate with the others, ways of being, however you want to see it, for our quote-unquote outer world, so our institutions, policies, technologies. Basically, there is that disconnection between the ontological, but also with it, the epistemologies, the ethics of our being from the reality and the world out there, like sort of witnessing something that is, we find ourselves in suddenly. Well, the book, especially the introductory and the concluding chapters, argue that we are not basically responding to our fullest potential if we are only focusing on one side of this story. So the book seeks to position the ontological and the structural as two threads woven with, into the same fabric, or two dimensions of the same reality. And to illustrate that, to illustrate those kind of combined forces, we have diverse contributions and examples presented in the 15 book chapters. So next slide. So this discussion touches really on the fundamental ontological question of what is the reality made of. So do we inhabit a world as objective, given, so which would be the materialist view, or is reality a process of co-becoming with the rest of the world where we are active participants? So this would be the process ontology and relational views of reality, the nature of reality. So this is really political ontology basics, right? So you may say that's so obvious. Of course, the two are inseparable. And it is obvious, I agree, but nonetheless, in the analysis of socioecological transformations and the solution space that we kind of aim to, this literature aims to bring about, this is neglected. So I think it's partly out of the fear of bringing those softer, they're seen as softer aspects, and they are softer aspects to the table when the table is about to burn down due to immediate risks and threats and violence and genocide and everything that's happening. So bringing these ontological and issues of worldviews and our inner states of being to fore is often seen as kind of stealing attention from the more immediate issues that we should talk about, right? So in chapter 1, I bring up the colonial and racial origins of the capitalism as an example of how the ontological and the structural is linked. And I discuss how capitalism's material exploitation and violence were and remain based on a specific set of worldviews, values, which of course they also reproduce at the same time. So in this context, I discuss the materialist dualist ontology, separating humans from nature, all the possible hierarchies and divisions, body, mind, nature, mind, matter, subject, object, etc., which legitimize various hierarchies of oppression against racialized or gender or whatever hierarchy is in question here, human bodies, but also other than human bodies and their labor as mere resources, objectifying them as something to be exploited, used, and dispossessed or disposed of after being used. So after that positioning, the chapter and the subsequent few chapters turn to indigenous, relational, non-dual, Eastern non-dual ontologies, which invites us to see ourselves as inter or intra-connected with the rest of nature and all beings. And then also other chapters tackle other dimensions, and we will hear also two of them today. But now let me move to my next 6 minutes, hopefully, and the chapter 2. So next slide. So in the chapter 2, I turn inwards and look just inward. Just to say to Esten, if I go over the limit, just feel free to let me know and I will wrap up. So, but yes. So I draw on Sankhya Yoga philosophy and Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The chapter explores the illusion of separate self as root cause of alienation, suffering, and ultimately socioecological collapse, but also psychological and philosophical crisis or crisis of meaning and many other issues that we are facing And then it goes on to propose radical intraconnectedness as a pathway for personal collective transformation, so both. And it does a few other things, but I will focus on these two, the illusion of separate self and intraconnectedness. So the first one, the illusion of separate self, across the Eastern philosophies, there is, even though they're really different, very much different, but there is this shared proposition that much of our human suffering arises from, in Sanskrit, avidya, so a fundamental misconception of who we are. And the idea with that is that we mistake the ego self, so the shifting mind-body nexus, for the quote-unquote true self. So in yogic metaphysics, this ego self, or prakriti, is impermanent and reactive, while the deeper true self, purusha, or pure consciousness, is unbounded and is shared across all forms of life. Again, the key point being that identifying only with the ego self makes us feel small, threatened, and alone. And this then produces a sense of lack that we try to resolve or compensate for through consumption, through control, clinging, domination of the rest of nature and others we separate from, as a sort of way of protecting out of fear and so on. So this inner state of mind becomes very much mirrored outward, so with, for instance, human nature split, subject-object dualism, and the hierarchies that structure modern societies. Then let's move to the next, radical interconnectedness. Next slide. So if separation is an illusion, what follows from seeing through it? In the chapter, I discuss radical interconnectedness, which goes beyond interdependence as proposed by Arturo Escobar. Where very shortly, like this is much more described in the chapter, but radical interdependence foregrounds our relations and mutual reliance on one another, while with the idea with intra-connecting, we suggest that there is a fundamental, at the fundamental level, we are one, we are not two to begin with. So the ontological primary basically is a little bit different. It's not a relation, but this joint or shared essence of oneness. So radical interconnectedness argues that each being is distinct expression of a single living conscious whole. So based on this philosophy that I discussed earlier, so your awareness, my awareness are not separate, but they are windows, two windows. I'm using some of the metaphors that are used in these Eastern philosophies, like two windows through which the same light shines. So I think this insight, while abstract or philosophical, has deep ethical and political potential, which I'm trying to argue for. And when the boundary between the self and the other softens, kindness, care, and nonviolence feel more neutral. But I want to say that even these philosophical views can and have been gravely misused through the history. We have like the ancient texts of Vedas, the Upanishads, which are the texts on which this Sankhya Yoga and Yoga Sutras are based, have been invoked to legitimize caste hierarchies and to basically spiritualize oppression. So my argument is not that this framework of inner work more broadly or yoga is like, okay, recipe for all our problems, but that it can be a powerful tool for healing and transforming when practiced and applied to that aim. And finally, let me know if I'm running out of time, but I just, if you moved. So you should be now seeing this from inner to collective transformations. I've been with that is the last slide. So seeing through this illusion of separation is basically just the beginning. It's not an end in itself. And I'm using some of the metaphors from the scaling transformations and the fractals in nature. In the book, it's not drawing on colleagues' work from Karen O'Brien and others. But what I would like to highlight here, that this inner work is not a withdrawal from political struggle, but is the ground from which meaningful action can arise, and that inner work can support collective action because the patterns we embody, again, like a bit repeating myself from the seeds that can ripple outward into communities and institutions and cultural norms, and that it's not instead of
1 minute.
resistance, but as
You have
it is.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. So it's not an escape from struggle. It's hopefully can support us in sustaining the struggle with clarity, but also compassion, and not reproducing the same violences. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabaheta. You have given us a lot of food for thought, a lot of seeds for planting, a lot of horizons to explore. So with great pleasure, now I will pass the floor to Irmelin Gram Hansen, who is a senior researcher at Western Norway Research Institute in Sogndal. No.
It's Maria.
We have
Maria Armstrong
Irmelin.
is the next. According to the slides, that's my slides.
Yes. So let's go to Irmelin. You don't have a slide, right?
I don't have slides, yeah. So,
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So you could just maybe stop the presentation if that's better.
Exactly. Yes. So just would like to introduce Irmelin. She's a senior researcher at Western Norway Research Institute in Sogndal, Norway, joining us from Norway today. And your contribution will be covering the deep relational ontology and responsibility themes that we look forward to hearing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, just thank you, Sabaheta, for editing this book and inviting me and others in. And thank you for organizing this event. It's just great to hear from everybody, and the seeds were really meaningful. And it was great to just hear you sketch out this the illusion. So let's get into it. My name is Irmelin Gram Hansen, and yeah, like Esin was saying, I work as a senior researcher at the Western Norway Research Institute. And in my work and in my life in general, I strive to support our individual and collective courage to do things differently and to live out our potential for generating transformative change for the well-being of all. So then how do you do that in practice? It's both in small and big tasks. But today I'm really happy to share some thoughts with you all that are drawing from the chapter that I contributed to this great and interesting volume. The chapter has had a long life. It draws from my PhD work, which again draws from my master's work, and both of those were collaborations with the Yupik community of Ikiagik in Southwest Alaska. I'm not indigenous, but I have worked alongside indigenous people and have been tremendously inspired for how to understand things differently and act differently because of that. So instead of going into the chapter, which is a little bit dense, and I hope that you will want to read it, and I would love to have conversations about all the nitty-gritty details and concepts. It is a little bit kind of heady in a way. So instead of going into that now in my precious minutes, I want to instead just share some realizations that have informed this chapter. So the first realization is that I am in a Cartesian and Newtonian paradigm. So much so that I can forget it. And in the chapter, like Sabaheta was talking about, I write about this, the role of Descartes and Newton in establishing this kind of dualistic and atomistic ontology, and how this deep-rooted assumption of separation, basically, can be linked to many of the social ecological challenges of our time through how they inform societal structures like extractivist capitalism and colonialism. And the thing about paradigms is that they are so all-encompassing, and it can be almost impossible to see the contours of anything else. It's like the water you swim in, right? And if you do see something else, it's very easy to kind of cast it to the side as nonsense.
And I remember the first time I learned about indigenous ontologies in my religion class in secondary school. And we learned about the Inuit shamans in Greenland, the Angakok. And I remember feeling really frightened. Frightened because it didn't adhere to the rules of my world. It didn't make sense. It was outside my worldview. And I wish my teachers had used this moment to open us up to an inquiry into this other space. But instead, the story was kind of treated as something like an exotic oddity from a faraway people who were definitely less developed than we are. And it wasn't until university that I was invited to challenge my assumptions of how the world works and the notion that there are not only different ways of understanding the world, but different ways of being in the world and different ways of worlding. That really blew my mind. And it wasn't until my PhD when I encountered scholarship that fundamentally questioned otherwise unquestionable truths, like physicist Karen Barad, that I dared myself to ask, what's missing from my worldview or from the kind of the unquestionable truths surrounding me, not only quietly in my own mind, but as an academic. And this relates to the second realization, which is that much of the most cutting-edge theories within the critical social sciences and environmental humanities draw directly from indigenous thinking and being. Theories like Bruno Latour's actor network theory and Karen Barad's agential realism that speak to a kind of live-in system of relations that give meaning to each part within it. And realizing the big names like Latour in many ways repeating and building on indigenous wisdom, it gave me really courage to also take these ideas seriously within my academic life, and it made me tremendously excited. And then it made me tremendously angry when I realized that I had not seen this connection sooner because it has been kept hidden. Not giving credit to indigenous scholars is contributing to the appropriation and disregard of indigenous ways of knowing and being. Why don't these prominent scholars give due credit? I think they feel frightened too, like I was in secondary school, frightened about the directness of this way of understanding the world, engaging with the world, and frightened to not be able to hide behind complex concepts or theories. Because while the indigenous ontologies describe something quite complex, it's also incredibly simple to comprehend because it directly links, thank you, to the human experience of connectivity, of relations. So while the work of post-humanists and other theories do help explore the specificities of some of these deep relational aspects, they oftentimes complicate things, maybe unnecessarily. So the final realization relates to kind of the main message of this chapter, which is that these indigenous ontologies and related social science theories are showing us that we have tremendous responsibility and potential to create a world where everyone can thrive. So a deep relationality, that is a relationality where relations have ontological primacy and where entities exist and are giving meaning as part of relations, that has implications. And in the chapter, I summarize this in two main principles, like I said, responsibility and potentiality. The potential we have for creating a different world and the responsibility we have for making use of that potential in the best way we can. And taking a deep relationality seriously feels quite intimidating. The sheer responsibility we have for how we show up every single moment. I go back and forth between feeling overwhelmed and empowered because this also means that within every moment there is a potential for something different than business as usual. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Irmelin. Thank you both for creating this space for thinking about the continued dominance of the material and dualist thinking, how this dominance marginalizes indigenous ontologies, yoga-based Eastern philosophies, and they are marginalized, they are sidelined, they are appropriated, co-opted for different purposes, including but not limited to racism and hierarchies. And you are reminding us in different ways the responsibility, in your terms, Irmelin, and to the world, to each other. And Sabaheta is reminding us the wholeness, interconnectedness, and the importance of real self. In a way, if I dare to connect the responsibility to the world and the real self as a threading line. So I don't really want to push this beautiful conversation into certain forms of questions, but I'm wondering how you would reflect on this responsibility. How does one act on this responsibility, and what are some of the forms that we can think of this responsibility kind of is channeled into political action or collective practice, or how can one's responsibility to their real selves and to the world and to our connectedness that we can maybe read through into indigenous ontologies or other traditions that we study, how can we be more aware of that and channel that into political transformation as a question that I would like to start, but please feel free to take up each other's comments. And we have 5 minutes for this reflection.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think, if I may invite myself to respond right away, I think
yes,
what Esin is asking is like how do we do this? I think it's really great example that what Irmelin was talking about, reflecting internally and finding yourself always in this. At some points, you feel, oh, this is great, I'm so empowered, but then also self-reflecting, okay, how do I show up this? Do I act up to my responsibilities, and what does this mean? And then becoming angry whether when you see an injustice where you don't have, for instance, like this is constantly that indigenous ideas, knowledges, sciences are being, especially in the past, it was like it's still today, but I think we are a little bit awakening to give more credit, and indigenous sciences themselves and scientists themselves are more present, and but it was a common practice. So that anger and that, like, okay, how do I do this better? So I think it's starting is from there. It's really like, I think Irmelin's reflection very much talk to your question. Irmelin, if you want to.
Yeah, thank you. I have really enjoyed reading, I mean, I've also been very confused, but also really enjoyed reading Karen Barad's work. And she writes about responsibility as the ability to respond ability, right? And there's this quote, I just found it, that ethics is not about providing the correct response to the other, because we can get a little bit stuck. And as somebody not Indigenous working on Indigenous issues, I feel very much that I might be overstepping, or it has to be perfect. It has to be a perfect, non-colonial, everything engagement. Otherwise, I'm wrong, or it's not my place. But then I found courage in her quote here that rather ethics is about the responsibility and accountability for the lively relationalities of becoming, of which we are a part. So I think it's about always just taking responsibility for that which is becoming, and I am a part of that becoming. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing, which I think is extremely important, is to understand how this inner work that you were talking about, Sabaheta, can be linked to structural change. And I think that structural change without inner change is like, change without a compass, without the direction and the compassion. but inner change without the structural change is also not getting us anywhere to dislodge some of these really, really entrenched oppressive systems that we've established in society. And so there's something about being really skillful about finding that inner place, your compass, your anchor, but then being extremely strategic with how you design and how you structure your actions to generate great impact from that place of your inner of the inner oneness. But to linking, and I think that's the challenge, is always linking that deep inner sense of self and as connected with that systemic change and different action that has to happen on the ground.
I have one. May I jump in? Yes, 1 minute, right? This is really key also, and I'm not sure if I highlighted it to like connecting the inner change and the outer. Like someone who has worked all my 15 whatever years of the career work within the outer structures, I approach this field of ontologies and world with this question, like, wait, what is this? What does it mean for outside? So I always look through that lens. And asking these questions, like exactly what does it mean if we are really not taking it, taking that to linking it to the worldly things, to our outside practice, right? And yes, I know that it does not directly, stops the genocide or feeds the starving, but I think it does provide us the resources, inner resources, to really stick with this, to motivate us, because you need to be strong to kind of to last when without despair. Otherwise, you just give up when the situations like this last for 2 years. And there.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sabaheta and Irmelin, for this beautiful wrapping up of the otherwise a very fruitful and extensive conversation. Let's move to the next cluster. And here we will hear from Maria Ernström Fuentes and Maria Fernanda Guevara, and our connecting themes are land, ancestral knowledge, wisdom, and more than human. These are just organizing themes, and hope you are taking notes and following, because we know these are very big issues, but we would like to present you the gists of our research. So let's start with Maria Ernström Fuentes, who is an associate professor of management and organization at Hanken School of Economics in Vasa, Finland. The floor is yours, Maria.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this previous conversation. I can say that today, this morning, we had a discussion with my students on breathing as a relational practice, and I could sense in both the first presentations a little bit of the discussions that we had on how we could reframe the world if we would see organizing centered on breathing instead of shareholder value. But that is not what I will be talking about today. My research has for long been in the intersection between humans, land, and multiple different ontologies. I did my research on forestry conflicts in South America and came in contact there with also indigenous defenders of the land. And that is something I carry with me also in my postdoc project, which this was part of. I have been interviewing many farmers around the world. It was actually during the COVID time, so I couldn't visit them, but I did podcasts with them. And from these podcasts, these stories that emerged from my conversations with regenerative farmers in many different countries around the world, this is actually the first real concrete project that I managed to materialize. And what is this about? Well, title is When Farm Worlds Change, Ontological Transformations in the Web of Life. And if we take next slide. Next slide. Yes. So regenerative agriculture, and when I entered this field to engage with research, it was still not so associated with global discourses attached to carbon and greenness of industrial agriculture. I need to say that because these are comments I've got later on. But really, at that point, as I approached and learned to know many farmers, I found a fascinating field where people could, through what they were talking about, I could see that they had become immersed and more in contact with the web of life, that they weren't functioning as, I would say, normal farmers that I had also talked to earlier in my previous research. But regenerative agriculture, what is it? Well, it's a question of definition, but just briefly here to move on. It addresses ecological degradation and also climate change by fostering holistic farming practices in collaboration with other species. This is a very general view of it. But what we're really working with most of the farmers here are grazing animals on revitalizing grasslands, basically, with moving around animals such as cows and sheep, mainly in the ones that I have talked to. It really makes the landscape come alive. So when I was talking with these farmers early on, I realized that there is something going on here with the agencies involved. It's not just the farmer, and it's absolutely not just the grass or the cow. There is something more exciting here in the kind of relationships that emerge as they shift into this field. There are other than human forces that you could say that it is the specific species here that is doing things that revitalize the land. But the changes are so transformative, both inner and outer, that it is a relational force that is going through these stories. And so I started to work based on my previous work, where I worked on ontological politics and the political ontology of multiple different worlds. I started to see this as ontological transformation, so worlds that are changing. And this is how I have defined it, not to start from shifts in human mindsets or technical knowledges and scientific understandings about the land. Rather, these ontological transformations involve other than human agencies that influence how farmers engage with farming and the land. Next slide, please. And so I am not going to go into the whole paper, but just briefly, this chapter draws on 20 stories of regenerative farmer. I have a method of storytelling that I have also been using before, where I draw on insights from both indigenous scholars, Hanna Guttorm et al. Here, and Mario Blaser, on how stories can help us understand how humans articulate their world through, and the things and the relations that are at stake in their world. It also shows...
Sorry,
yes,
Maria, sorry to interrupt. You have 2 minutes to finish.
So it's
Yes,
and I'm applying a affirmative positionality. So I'm not really critiquing what they're saying, but I'm following their stories and strengthening them. And next slide, please. Yes. It was really fascinating to follow the stories from a more than human lens, because although the farmers are completely immersed and talking about more than human forces and the transformations in the land, they do not always express it directly in word as such. So following these stories, I really had to read through around the lines as well. But here are 5 categories that I kind of found that they experience a disruption of their individual self. They are also, when they come in contact with regenerative agriculture, they have sort of a aha moment that kind of reveals a deeper sense of understanding place or place thought, which is also a concept that comes from indigenous theorizing. Many of those that were immersed in science, they also started to challenge the dualist science that underpin biology and agronomy. And what really then transformed, as I had in my initial quote, transformed their own world, were the practices that were embedded in these places, and how that then completely reshaped the landscapes into more flourishing landscapes. Finally, there is also an expanded notion of the self. Many of the farmers do not longer think of themselves in individual terms, rather they see themselves as part of the landscape. Next slide, please. It's a little bit taking time. Next slide. Or can I do it? Yes. Well, here are just a few of the quotes from the article. I read up one of them, and I will not take more of this time here, but let's go to the conclusions on the next slide. So, well, they are the ontological transformations completely transform the way that they view the world, the way that they see the world, they rate and they relate, and they do the practices. It disrupts the separation between the self and the world. They do become more relational in their thinking, many of them, even if it's a little bit difficult to express this at time. There are no words at time for this change. And the change then also emerged through sensorial embodied practices. The more than human agency is very central, and what I also wanted to end my conclusions with is that I've really tried with this affirmative way of describing these farmer stories to also go beyond the kind of hero stories that we see in regenerative farming, where it is the farmer that is in complete control. Bringing in these non-human forces into the change process also challenges the farmer as the only one that is in control, and that it actually is a collaborative engagement among many different agencies of the land. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and that's very that's taking us for thank you for taking us into this very interconnected and form of relationship between the farmers and non-human, other than human beings. So let's move to Maria Fernanda Guevara's contribution, and she's a lawyer and a cultural anthropologist with over a decade of experience working with traditional communities in the Amazon, and she's joining us from Italy today. Floor is yours, Maria.
Excuse me, just before Fernanda, before starting, can you not share while Fernanda is talking, because she doesn't have slides, so it would be nice to remove the PowerPoint. Thanks.
Thank you, Sabarita, for editing this book and inviting me to be part of it. It's such a inspiring book, and this session even more. So thank you so much. Yeah, I'm a Brazilian anthropologist, and as Imerlin, I'm not an indigenous. But I'm hoping here that I can honor my teachers, my indigenous teachers, and share a bit about what I have learned from them. And following what Maria was just saying, I want to begin with a story, because in many indigenous traditions, stories are how knowledge begins and is shared, and they are seen as openings, sort of like an exercise of an ancestral memory, rather than just explanations. And I think this story was actually one of the main inspirations for my chapter and for the ideas that frame it. And so I have been working with the Yawanawa people from the Brazilian Amazon for a long time now. And there was one time that I was with one of my teachers. His name is Nani Katayuve. And I asked him, how do they say sacred in their language, in their native language? And then he actually paused and he was thinking, and then he said, you know, we don't have a word for sacred. And I was really surprised, because it was like, how come you don't have a word for sacred? And considering all the spirituality behind their tradition. And then he started to explain to me that there are things that they don't have a single word for defining them, and that actually they see these things as like a meaning, something bigger than a single word. And then he explains to me that for them, sacred is the act of breastfeeding and the mother's milk itself. And he was saying that because it feeds the baby, it calms, it nourishes, and ultimately because it sustains the continuity of life. And then I started to think, how are we in our modern society, how are we feeding ourselves today? How are we nourishing ourselves? And not just in terms of our bodies, but also how are we nourishing our spirits? And are we still capable of nourishing ourselves with what is sacred, whatever sacred means to each of us? And since I moved from Brazil to Europe more than a decade ago, I've witnessed a huge fascination among Europeans with indigenous practices, ceremonies, and their medicines as well. And also, I think in general, spirituality has become increasingly central to people's lives in the past years. When we think about yoga, for example, that a few decades ago was actually unknown to the West, almost unknown to the West. Now it's everywhere, often practices as a fitness routine rather than a spiritual path. And to me, this growing interest in spirituality emerges at the same time as our deep ecological crisis. And there are a lot of people that argue that the ecological crisis is actually a spiritual crisis, a crisis of meaning, of relationship, of belonging. And then I, like, through all my work with indigenous peoples, but not just them, again, as Maria just showed, like farmers and what we call the quilombolas in Brazil as well, which are Afro-descendant communities, and so on. They also have different ways of using the land, and to me, what I've learned from them is that the forest is this space where nature, culture, politics, and spirituality are intertwined. And I've studied a lot about drivers of deforestation, climate change, and so on. But to me, what popped as a very important question in terms of what is our problem today, or are the main drivers of this crisis and everything, it's that it's not really technical. It's more related to what Emerlyn was explaining in her talk, is relational. How do we see nature? How do we see ourselves within it? And how have we forgotten that the two cannot be separated? And I think she already talked about it. But yeah, we live in this era where, like, human domination of the earth is so extreme that we finally have no choice but to rethink how we relate to the rest of nature, to the more than human world. And our actions shape our ecosystems, climates, and futures, but they also reveal our profound disconnection from this more than human world. And indigenous groups, on the opposite, like for them, for many of them, I don't want to generalize here, but spirituality is actually woven into the very fabric of life. It is a great part of their perspective in the continuity of existence. It's not separable from daily practices and cultural practices. It's an acknowledgement of a world beyond the visible, beyond the anthropos, and with multiple perspectives. What Brazilian anthropologist Viveiros de Castro call perspectivism, that differ from being to being, where the presence of spirits and the guiding hand of their ancestors are there all the time. And I'm not talking just about human ancestors, but other than human as well. So they are real as the lands they walk on. And rituals and ceremonies are not just cultural formalities. They are vital communal and educational experiences that connect individuals to the cosmos, to each other. And because of that, they have a very different relationship to death, for example. So for many groups, death is actually a continuity of existence. It's the spiritual world where people go back to their original forms. And they also have a different, I risk saying, neurological system. And this is not just because of their interactions with plants and medicines, but mainly because these rituals and practices teach them that there is a conscious or a spirit, as they call, that goes beyond theirs, and so their brains are sort of trained to be open for that interaction, different than ours. As Irmelin was saying, we're so fixed in these narratives and everything that it's actually very difficult to us to see that. And they are in this constant communion with the more than human world. And I think, to me, this is the sacred attunement that we had nearly forgotten in our society. So then I was interested in understanding what happens to us non-Indigenous people when we enter these worlds. And then between 2007,
Fernanda? Yeah, apologies for interrupting. Your time is up and a bit over, actually. Can we keep this question for the panel, what it does to us? Or do you want to say a few sentences and then we can move to the discussion? However you prefer.
What is better? We can keep it for the discussion. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very beautiful, I think, question to connect you and Maria's contribution. So if you allow me, I would like to move to the reflections, conversations between you and Fernanda. And please feel free to respond to each other or just react to each other. But I think that was a very nice question to how these regenerative practices, ancestral knowledge, or transformative practices like yoga, which we are seeing popping up in our worlds, how do they transform us? And maybe how do they transform this colonial, racial, capitalist violence that they have emerged out of? So just floor is open to you, and please share your thoughts. And we have 6 minutes for this conversation.
Do you want to continue, Maria Fe?
Yeah, okay, just to conclude, yeah, I think in terms of what happens with us, my research has showed that a lot of people that were in Yawanawa ceremonies, they described this profound shift of like softening the ego, a recognition of belonging to nature. A lot of them changed their diets, for example, for eating less meat, and even their career paths, and acting as well more responsibly in relation to others, but especially in relation to the rest of nature. And then I tried to relate this to what Arne Naess called the ecological self. So I think they act as catalysts for these transformations that we are seeking. But again, it's not just like going to the ceremony. You need to go back to your reality and do your homework. And I think this is the main challenging thing, as Emerling was also pointing out, in terms of like change and transformation.
I can connect to that. I mean, farmer worlds are very different from indigenous worlds in a way. There is a book by Hugh Campbell, I think his name is Hugh Campbell, about farming inside invisible worlds, and where he speaks of transformations of farmer ways of relating to the land in New Zealand so coming also to terms that those lands are not ancestral lands for the farmers. And I think that this is something that is maybe also missing in a lot of the regenerative debates, is who the ancestral roots of the farms. It depends, of course, where the farms are, because in some places they do have deep ties to the land. But it's very different to indigenous. In that sense, the indigenous experiences, and that needs to be acknowledged. But the transformations are still very deep, and they are transformative in and relational in many senses. How to exactly express it, because I mean they had difficulties in expressing it, and I had difficulties in catching that in the stories. But I think that the deepest sense of doing away with the separation, because amazing as it is with farmers that are constantly in contact with the living land, this dualist way of understanding the land that comes with the Cartesian knowledge has completely structured their practices in the past. And that is, I think, something that I bring with me, but also it challenges a lot of my assumptions about food, land, and what is the best kind of lively matter on the land. So for me, those discussions has also transformed me in what I see as agricultural landscapes that are good, in a way, if you can say good and bad. What are extractive and deteriorating, and what are regenerative? It's a transformation also for me to read landscapes in a way.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Fernanda. If it's this has been a very nice, vibrant exchange, and because of time, I suggest we move on to our next cluster. And we have 4 presenters in this cluster. So, and this is going to be the final cluster for today, and it focuses on, again, very rich themes of care, feminism, education, and resistance. We will start with Aslıhan Oğuz and Ilona Steiler. Aslıhan is a doctoral researcher at Tampere Peace Research Institute, TAPRI, in Finland, and Ilona holds a PhD in Global Development Studies, University of Helsinki, and is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Tampere Peace Research Institute. And their contribution will come out of their collective chapter together with Mariana Jauhola, Satu Sundström, and Violeta Guterres Zabor. The floor is yours, Aslıhan and Ilona. And you have 7 minutes. And I would like to remind the audience that if you have any questions, please write in the chat. We will come to them at the end of the session with time allowing.
Yes, also from our side and from the other authors, thank you to Sabaheta for compiling the book and going through the journey with us of writing this chapter, and today also organizing the book launch so that we can present and also hear more about the other chapters. So just very briefly about our chapter, as I mentioned earlier, we center the idea of feminist ethics of care in our chapter, and we claim that it is essential for socio-ecological transformative movements, but also trains of thoughts or any kind of progressive movements to pay attention to the way in which care is always entangled with violence. So what we mean by that is basically also referring to what Sabaheta also said earlier, that we cannot act like we are out of this world, and we cannot see ourselves or movements as separate from oppressive structures that have shaped the world into what it is today. And feminist ethics of care, we see it not as a panacea for all the bads that are in the world, but we see it as a perspective and as a tool that helps us to highlight the ways in which acts and intentions of caring are always entangled with existing structures of oppression, be they based on sexuality or race or capitalist accumulation. So what then do we suggest? We draw on the work of Joan Tronto and Maria Puig de la Beda Casa to see ethics of care as a way of being attentive to who is cared for and what is cared for. So how do we care? And we suggest to see care as consisting of the three elements of caring as laboring and of working. So it's the actual hard work of really working towards positive change. And it also involves emotions and affections. So we feel about certain ways of caring. And also to keep in mind that acts of caring are always interventions, and as such, they always have important ethical and political implications, and they are never really pure. So with that as a framework, we are suggesting that we can work with deficits of care and with existing forms of violence as a constant process.
So next slide, please. So one of the examples in the book chapter we are going to present today is about the possible exclusions that local food sovereignty or maybe other local food justice movements reproduce for people coming from different cultures, such as immigrants. So first, what's food sovereignty? Food sovereignty advocates for democratizing decision-making, taking the power in the food system from corporates to back to people, providing culturally appropriate food for everyone, while also emphasizing the importance of local production. Now, here, as some scholars point out, increasing the emphasis on local production, localizing food production, brings the questions of to what extent the non-local dietary preferences and needs can or should be challenged. And here, if we take the meaning of local, which can be a relatively contested and ambiguous term, as in geographical proximity, which is the first meaning that comes to mind, and also usually the first meaning that these movements usually take, then these movements will only include, obviously, foods that are produced within their geographical proximity as well. And this, we say, may result in some immigrants and immigrant groups within this society to be excluded due to their different food culture and food wishes, food needs. And immigrants, for example, may drop out of these initiatives after a trial period because they may not be feeling, they may not be able to consume the food items they receive, or they may not join at all and such initiatives in the first place because they're not feeling part of it, or they want to retain their food ways, kind of cultural continuity, identity continuity as well. For some immigrants, of course, it's not like all. But when this happens, a local food sovereignty or food justice initiative aiming for this transformation in the food system will leave some people behind, and this transformation will end up or may end up being exclusionary. And this example challenges us to move beyond what is usually assumed by local and instead critically engage with core values of ethics of care, connecting different people and beings and places. So, for example, we say in the multicultural communities we are living today, challenging the meaning of local, for example, can the so-called ethnic food stores, which serve a big function for these, for a lot of immigrants, for feelings of belonging and identity. Can they be part of somehow included in the, local? But this obviously needs further research. But we also want to say that We do recognize the sincere attempts that these movements are doing to labor for a better world, but we also recognize that there is an invisibility and potential deficit of care in this instance for immigrants. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ilona and Aslıhan. And let's move to our next speakers, Paola Minoa and Tamara Taher. Paola is an associate professor of geography at the University of Turin, Italy, and an adjunct professor of global development studies at the University of Helsinki, Finland. And Tamara Taher is a fellow researcher at the University of Turin, Italy. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Apologies from Tamara, but because she can't be here in this moment, so I will speak for both. Actually, this is a conversation that we reported in this chapter, and I'm trying also to give some outlines about this. I mean, this discussion. This discussion is not about a confrontation of two completely different experiences, but still we saw, I mean, by working together, being together, we saw that there are certain lines of commonality. We know that in this very moment, the destruction of Gaza advances, and this on the left is I mean, how it is now the oldest university in Gaza, the Islamic University of Gaza, that happened 2 days after the 7th October attack. So in what happens in that is represented on the right side is, I mean, something while a genocidal, you know, history seems to be in the past, has been in the past. Still, extractivism, and racism persist also through assimilation policies that are directed especially through education programs. So education is really crucial here, and we saw it as a crucial moment in the formation of an identity that respect more the hegemonic powers in both cases. So, but our chapter also presents practices of resistance in these two cases, building on Tamara's Palestinian personal and scholarly engagement, and also my research that I've done for more than a decade, and other periods beforehand. So. Yeah, so in both cases, we saw how oppressed peoples are subordinated through land dispossession and knowledge as domination. So, and we want to expose, however, the education's role in emancipation and survival. And we have seen how resistance in the movements of people involves reconnecting with land as a site of intergenerational learning, while also defending languages and identities through assimilation. So here, if you can pass to the following slide. So these are, I mean, our chapter has gone through these three points, three themes. So the state politics structure of education plus hegemonic versus oppressors knowledges, but also practices of epistemic resistance and care in education, and centering land of community also as pedagogies outside of the academy. I would now highlight only 2 points for the reasons of time. So the first one is a conversation that I started because by looking at the Ecuadorian experience, I've seen how the politics has tried to solve the problem of assimilation through intercultural programs. So, but why this in Ecuador, has been established as a goal, but not respected because then politics had other ideas of how to deal with it. This is absolutely for the Palestinian case it's absolutely something that is not possible because after after especially the current moment of genocide, it's I mean, it's something that is not viable. I mean, Palestinians have often transformed colonial disruptions of education anyway into opportunities for alternative learning. During the first Intifada, when schools and universities were closed, popular committees assumed the responsibility for children's education as practices of sumud, or steadfastness that represent, I mean, very creative forms of cultural resistance. And then also other emancipatory practices have been done through cultivating victory gardens to resist dependency on the occupation's economy. In the case of Ecuador, what I've noticed, especially by looking from the site of a university that is established in the Amazonian area, are other practices of also of caring and of trying to attract and keep a relationship with, I mean, among students from different origins that otherwise, under the structures of knowledge, of the academic knowledge that follow the Western rules, especially Spanish and Mestizo, with programs done in Quito. The result was then a completely, how to say, exit of students from their, from the university. So there are experiences like collective like a collective named Retomando Raíces, which means retaking roots, that have been organizing also practical spaces. You can go to the next slide.
And Paola, may I remind you that you have 1 minute
Yes,
to
I
wrap
just
it
want
up?
to finish this. Yeah, so with some ceremonies, because it's and that was allowed in the spaces of the university. So ceremonies and rituals, but also community therapy, psychological therapy done as a self-organized. Plus instructions about medicinal plants and other elements that are fundamental in and that is important to reconnect students with. So there are many experiences that would be interesting to share, both that we have seen as having similar patterns in both examples. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Ilona and Aslıhan. It's very nice. This panel is nicely put because it shows how actually violence and care are entangled, as Ilona was saying. Ilona and Aslan showed us how violence exists within movements of care. So like food sovereignty movements have its own aspects of marginalization, whereas Paula and Tamara showed us how extreme situations of violence can still give space, or there is space for a moment of care, resistance, and education within egregious context of violence. So it's different sides of a similar coin, let's say. So the floor is open for your reflections to each other's pieces, but I was left with a question of how care can become a transformative path towards nonviolence in your examples, or in feminist ethics of care, or how decolonizing care and education looks like in practice, and how does violence can be transformed and changed in a way that it doesn't enter into these practices of resistance, pedagogy, or care. If you have any reflections on either these questions or to each other's presentations, please welcome. And we have 6 minutes for this dialogue.
Thank you. Ilona, would you like to start? Or
Well, yeah, I can start, and well, I would think that, yeah, taking up the question of how can we basically, yeah, decolonize care, or how can we practice care in a non-violent way, and based also on the argument that we present in the chapter, it's quite difficult, because any way of trying to address some form of violence might very well create new exclusions and new violence, even if it is not done intentionally. So the one way forward is basically already to recognize the limitations of what we are doing, that there are always limitations and always exclusions, and try to be attentive to those voices or to those beings who we might not see or not hear. And this is yeah, it is very much hard work. So the not settling down and saying, now we have identified a cause that is worth fighting for, and this is basically what we do as humans. But then not settle with that, but also keep challenging ourselves and saying, who is it that we care for, and how can we, basically to say, how can we care better?
yeah, if I may respond, I think that decolonizing education, care, and so on, but just the word decolonizing, I want to stress the fact that it's very much related to the giving land back to the oppressed indigenous people in this case, and Palestinian people in the other one. I think that I mean, in education, education has to be related, of course, to the land-based practices, land reconnection, because it's not just land as a resource, but it's a place, a positioning of ancestral practices, histories, and I mean, cultures, and many things, you name them. But I think that within these, recognition, you can have a reconciliation, and you can have a care that goes also beyond. Beyond your people, and beyond the oppression. So that's why I think that it was quite illuminating for me to discuss this aspect with Tamara, and to see the different steps of the situation, whereas it was possible and important also for the for instance, the mestizo students to recognize themselves, to the center themselves, and recognize themselves as part of the pluriverse, not just as the center, while the others are to be involved in a multicultural setting. But all of them are in the same level at the periphery, and all together create a pluriversal world of justice among all of them. So that's why you need to have certain conditions first that are decolonial, and then the caring can have different forms. And this caring is very important in a university that, for instance, the one in Amazonia, that is based in a very contested region. Where there is extractivism, still land grabs, and a lot of rights that remain unrespected. Thanks.
Maybe I can also say that in my work also I'm looking at justice in the food system from the perspective of immigrants, and the more I look at this, I mean, I'm only going to say from the point of food movements, but especially violence, or in this case exclusions, come when there are these transformative movements, meaning, well, start insisting on certain strict boundaries, like dimensions, and not really allowing so much of plural knowledges, other food ways in this case. So I think being more open to, like, for example, in the case of local, like there is nothing inherently just above local. And so then what other food knowledges, for example, in this case, can enter the discussion opens up a lot more, and maybe can decrease the amounts of violence in this case and in exclusion.
Thank you, Aslıhan. Thank you, Ilona and Paula. Now, with all these thoughts from three very exciting and rich panels, we can move to our final part of today, which has to be very short, I'm afraid, due to time. But if there is any burning question or comment, we can maybe have a few questions.
Yes, it would be great to hear some questions from the audience who are still here. And if not, we can have any final words by anyone who wants to, among the speakers, who wants to share something. From my side, I realize I didn't thank everyone for being part of this great collection. So thank you for that. Yeah, I invite questions and reflections.
There's definitely much to process, but since we have our wonderful authors here, if you have any birthing thoughts, any new emerging thoughts, you can have this moment to share. Yes, Paula, go ahead.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. Also, my thanks to Sabaheta for coordinating all the book, and Giselle for for this beautiful panel. I wanted to ask everyone, because this is something that you know, the book project started long ago, and I could say that in these 2 years or something more, the world has has changed. So how do you see, is it still, you know, at that time, there was like a movement that was, you know, really more constituting a critical mass towards transformation. No, socio-ecological transformation looked like it had a bigger audience. Nowadays, it looks like it is marginalized by, you know, other pressures. So any one of you, well, I mean, my example is so evident because I'm dealing with Gaza. It makes it very, very. So I don't want to. Yeah. So what it has been for you, not only related to this chapter, but to your work in general, dealing with these topics.
That's a beautiful question. Yeah.
Maybe I can jump in just with a reflection, because I think this is the world as it is, and this is life happening, and I think it's problematic when we think of just transformations as something that we do in our spare time when everything is well. But so the question is, how, amidst all of this, how can we work in a way that is more just, even if the constraints are immense and the starting point is really, really bad. So then how in this space can we work in a way that considers part wholes, considers justice, considers the voices that are not being heard, even when the national government has to consider budgets for national security, how can they think about those questions in the lens of justice, not sidestepping these softer concerns, but bringing them in even as we work in the day-to-day dirty politics of the real world. And I think what Ashlehan was saying just before of this, I think it's very important to have principles to work from, but then having immense flexibility in who we allow in, what kind of nuance we allow to be part of the transformations movement. Because if we're too strict, it has to be perfect, it has to be look like this or feel like this in our image, we're not going to succeed. So we have to hold this radical sort of tension between being really clear about what is an okay way of relating to one another, being together, and then open to many expressions for what change can look like. Yeah, anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Maybe I could add here to that. I see a polarization. I see that is ongoing. So what Irmelin just mentioned, I think it's getting even harder to connect, and particularly to connect with farmers who have cows. That are the ones that I am working dearly with, the landscapes they have. There are many preconceived conceptions about what a farmer is. And it's not common that so thank you, Sabaheta, it's not common that these stories are allowed into these kind of spaces where we're talking about transformative processes, because we do have a lot of layers to work with also with the people that are feeding us here nearby, in terms of how those have become separated from their experiences, also view them from a distance. So the polarization is feeding into farmer realities in multiple ways, and it's making it very difficult to make sense of it. There are also those that are maybe going on a transformative path, and those that are working on other at the same time with this kind of war machine going on. There is also a polarization there with food. So on the one hand, our governments are talking about localizing food, but on the other hand, the kind of work and practices engagement with the landscape that are transforming really human-nature relations, if you say it like that, are not the ones that are given priority by our governments. So that's why I'm also saying that it's so important to practice this kind of affirmative research methodology, because it's so easy that the farmers that are really fighting for a more beautiful world through their practices somehow become not relevant in the bigger discussions. But they are our land carers, and helping them to bring it to more land carers is also very important to inspire that. So it's troubling, all that is going on.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, Fernanda?
Yeah, on my case, I think when I started this research, I was actually very hopeful about the fact that, indigenous rituals and ceremony were actually becoming, fashion somehow, especially coming from a lot of many years working in the climate change agenda and everything. It gave me this sort of hope that, people would change quicker within this context of ceremonies and indigenous medicines and so on. But now I need to say it's a completely different scenario. I'm super worried about what's going on in terms of appropriation, in terms of how this knowledge and spirituality is being used without the respect that it deserves. But still, I think in terms of transformations, there are like these small niches and sort of like islands of hope that we can look at to stay hopeful. So I think they're happening in these different contexts and not like in the big picture. So sometimes we get like this gray vision of the great picture, and we feel very unhopeful. But then when we are in touch with this, these niches of transformations, it gets a bit better, I guess.
Thank you, Fernanda. Yes, Sabahat.
I'm aware that we are quite out of time, but it's great to have this discussion, and we have each other's time and attention here. I guess I just want to say that, like, responding to what Paula asked, yes, when I started the idea about this book, my intentions back then, the original, so it has changed really a lot over the years. It was like, okay, let me bring the different perspective on the transformations. I have wanted to include more voices and perspectives, but it wasn't possible. But you understand the point. Let's have indigenous, let's have Sami, let's have youth perspectives, which are not there. But yes, so let's have more and more feminist, and then it changed probably like how my own motivation and personal path with all that kind of inner work, like connecting what I was doing in my personal time, either being meditation or philosophy of yoga, and then and seeing also what I receive from you, how we are talking about some of this very much ontological and personal, and others about policies, and strategies, which we'll hear more in the next part. Then I thought, like, oh yes, this would be great framing, and this is the final project, great framework for the project. But again, it's been for a year or so since then, and I have had this tension that, okay, do I continue thinking and working with all this, what seems very light, and let's have beautiful ideas in our head at a time of great violences and so. But I think I'm more and more convinced, and I have this. I think this is why these personal reflections are so relevant for our outer, like for the bigger questions of violence and what we are living through, or divisions, polarization, is that not to give up. So yeah, I would have really good reasons to give up and not talk about yoga, because it's one of the examples where yoga philosophy and science has been reduced to nothing but flow, power, physical exercise, right? But no, there's that determination that, well, we have to stick in, and here is where I think this inner becomes really important, that determination, that courage, or whatever you want to call it, to show up, to work through the messy and all the seeing the violence within transformative movements, but still not give up. I guess not get into despair. Yeah.
Thank you, Sabahat, and thanks everyone. Unfortunately, we have to close the event now because we are over our time. And on part of the organizing team, me, Sabaheta, and Domna, I would like to thank everyone, especially our dear presenters, and to our audience, especially those of you who stayed till the end. Thanks to you. We are very grateful that you have given your time and labor and care to this collective conversation and knowledge making and being together. So we would like to also mention, as you can see in the chat, that there will be a second part to this launch events of this book, which you can find on the book website, justglowproject.com. And there in the second launch, we will move from the more inner to the more structural issues, policy issues, and justice dimensions. So it will be quite a complementary event to this one. And we hope that the 7 seeds that you that was distributed at the beginning of the event will stay with you and will grow and shine together with you. And then we look forward to more conversations and interactions. Thank you very much. Sabaheta, do you want to say something?
Oh, thank you, Esin. Thank you, everyone. This was great closing. That is perfect. Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
nice evening, afternoon,
Bye-bye.
morning,
you.
wherever you are.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I guess at least we will stop recording. Can Domna stop recording?
I think
I actually
I
stopped
don't
it.
know.
I hope.
You did? Okay.